4. We have present in the meeting Councillors Allison, Anderson, Brown. We have apologies from Councillor Carmichael and Councillor Scott is substituting. We have present Councillors Chalmers, Clark, Convery, Cooper, Cowan, Devlin, Fagan, Ferguson-Miller, Hamilton, Kerr, Logan, Loudon, Hugh MacDonald, McAllen, McClymont, McCreary, Leslie MacDonald, McGeever, McLachlan, Nelson. We have apologies from Councillor Razak and Councillor Cowie is substituting. We have apologies from Councillor Robb. We have present Councillors Ross, Shearer and Walker, and I'll hand back to the Chair. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much. Could I come to item 1, which are declarations of interest? Are there any declarations of interest? There are none. Could I come now to item 2, which are the minutes of the previous meeting? Are there any questions on the minutes of the previous meeting? I don't see any questions, so can we agree those minutes as a correct record?
Agreed.
Okay, we're agreed. Can I come now to item 3, which is the Revenue Budget Year-End Report, and Jackie Taylor will speak to this report. Jackie.
Thank you, Chair. This is the first of a run of 2 revenue reports for committee this morning. This is a Revenue Budget Year-End Report, so this is closing off last financial year. We'll summarise what the year-end position is, and Appendix 1, as usual, shows the figures that relate to the position that we're reporting. So if I take you to section 4 on page 16, there's a reminder at section 4.1 on our probable outturn position that was reported to committee in January. So this was our early year-end estimate that was put forward. And after agreed transfers to reserves, we were reporting a break-even position. And that included a corporate transfer to reserves of £9 million. £6 million of that was for future budget strategies. And £3 million was for budget pressures into 24-25. In terms of a comparable position at year-end, we are reporting a further underspend of £128,000. Now that's summarised at table 1 of your report on page 16, and you can see the right-hand column of that table showing the movement from our probable outturn position that was reported in January. Now this is made up of movements in our resources position, in loan charges, in corporate items and in council tax. And again, the appendices give details across all of these areas, and it's summarised in the remainder of the report, and I'll take you through that. So at section 4, we're covering the movement in our resources position. After the year end, we're reporting a movement of £58,000 to our probable outturn position, so a minor movement from what we were expecting. But I would highlight at 4.5, we're reporting around social work resources. There's been an increase of £174,000 on the predicted underspend in the area that's delegated to the Integrated Joint Board. Now, at the probable outturn time, we agreed that the underspend could be retained by the IGB and set aside in their reserves for future pressures. And we're recommending again today that that further underspend of £174,000 is also retained by the IGB. At section 4.6, we're picking up the position on our loan charges, and it's a better position than we anticipated by £751,000. And that reflects the fact that we had higher cash balances on deposit, and there was a higher interest rate that we received on those. And that's offset by a number of items as covered at section 4.7, most notably a charge that we've had from Glasgow City Council, and that's in relation to claims and litigations from the former Strathclyde Council area. That they are managing on our behalf, and that was £730,000 of a charge. In terms of council tax, we were pretty much where we expected to be, with only a minor movement of £33,000 from our probable outturn position. So we did approve transfers to reserves as part of our probable outturn position, but we are asking at 4.9 for further approval for transfers to reserves, and that's totalling £2.3 million, and they're detailed in Appendix 4 for your information. And it would be for committee to approve those. So if I take you to section 411 on page 18, the final underspend of £128,000 that I mentioned at the start of the report, we are suggesting that that is set aside, and that will help in future budget strategies, including our pay award requirements, and we'll come on to that topic later in the papers. Section 414 and 415 cover transactions that are required but are not affecting our bottom line position. So firstly, it relates to where we have to account for revenue and capital spend in the correct places, and also transactions that relate to how we are managing funding that was provided for our pay award this year. The government provided funding in the form of capital grant, and we were required to use that in order to meet revenue costs for pay award, and we've had to adjust for that within our position, but they haven't impacted on the Council's bottom line position. Section 5 of the report on page 18 covers our housing revenue account, and it's also showing a break-even position. Now, the HRA position is managed from transfers to and from the HRA reserves, and we have seen at the end of the year that it's been a favourable movement in terms of HRA to the tune of £1.2 million. That mainly relates to additional rental income that they've received for new build properties and also a reduction in their loan charges. So if I take you back to the recommendations in the paper at section 2.1, we are asking that the underspend of £128,000 is noted, that the additional £174,000, which relates to the adults and older people budget that's delegated to the IGB, is retained by the IGB. We're asking that the £128,000 underspend is transferred to reserves, and also that the additional transfers to reserves totalling £2.3 million be approved, and that the break-even position on the housing revenue account is also noted. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much, Jackie. Can I ask if there are any questions or points in this report? Could you indicate now? The only point I wanted to raise was that I had an inquiry from Councillor Robb, who unfortunately can't be here today, about the renewable heat incentive and feed-in tariff on Appendix 4. And our suggestion was that the 152,000 generated there should be, there could potentially be an amendment to set that money aside for SEIF. Having taken advice from Jackie, I don't think an amendment is necessary, but what I would ask the committee to do is note that request, and then when we are putting together that future programme, there is £152 there that could be set aside for SEIF. The reason that I think that was significant is the money that we spend on SEIF is money that we spend to save. So this is essentially a bit of income we didn't expect to have. Set it aside for SEIF, you could turn that into a bigger saving in future years. So I just, if we could note that request to be actioned at a later date with the approval of a future committee. Okay, if there are no other questions then, can we agree to note the report?
Agreed.
Okay. And indeed, I'm just checking out if there are any, actually it's not just to note the report, there are recommendations in there to approve. Could we agree the recommendations in the report?
Agreed.
Right. Okay, if I could come now to item 4, which is the revenue budget monitoring paper, and it's back to Jackie. Jackie.
Thank you, Chair. So this is our second revenue report. This has taken us into the current financial year, and we're reporting to the 17th of May, which is very early in the year, and there's not much term in the way of figures in terms of to note, but I would point out that we are estimating a break-even position at this point in time of the year. I would also point out that the appendices that committee will be used to seeing look slightly different from what you're used to, and this is due to the introduction of our new financial management system, Oracle Fusion. So it'll still give you the same information in terms of what we've spent, but it also allows us to predict earlier in the year our expected outturn position. So the same information is provided for you, but it just looks slightly different. In terms of information to note within this paper, I would draw your attention to sections 4.4 onwards. So if I start at page 28 at 4.4, we are noting the position around teacher numbers. You will recall last year we talked about the risk of funding being held back if teacher numbers were not maintained. By the end of the year, the council had maintained our teacher numbers, so this wasn't an issue for us, and funding was provided. Other councils also received funding, whether or not they had maintained their teacher numbers. But as we've moved into 24-25, the situation is that we have been advised that £145 million of funding nationally is being held and will be distributed via a specific resource grant. Now, that would require us to sign a letter at the outset of the year accepting this grant and saying that we would maintain teacher numbers. Our share of that £145 million is £9.4 million. And I would say that this position is very fluid in terms of information that we have around the rules on maintaining teacher numbers. We have been told that the government will consider mitigations around why we would reduce teacher numbers, but will not know if those mitigations are acceptable until much later in the year, and that would be after the census exercise that we would find out the results of by December. We have also been told that the reduction in funding that councils could receive would be proportionate to the actual number of teachers that are reduced. But again, as I say, the position is very fluid around information on this. Discussions are ongoing through COSLA with the Scottish Government, and we have ourselves sent a letter to the Scottish Government looking for early engagement on the mitigations that we would like to present in terms of teacher numbers, because we do know at this point in time that it's unlikely that we will maintain our teacher numbers this year. The reasons for that are detailed at section 4.7, and they relate to two main areas. Firstly, that we've used temporary funding for 2 years to employ around 46 teachers. That funding has now ended and those posts have now ended. Therefore, we will expect to see a reduction in our teacher numbers this year. There's also a situation where the national number of newly qualified teachers is lower than has been in recent years, and the share that we will get of those NQTs will also be lower than we've seen in previous years. So again, that's a reason why our teacher numbers will reduce. So we believe we have strong mitigations as to why our teacher numbers will reduce. But at this point in time, we don't have the comfort that the government would accept them as acceptable, and therefore we wouldn't see our teacher number, our grant reduce in association with that. We also mentioned at 4.8 that normal practice would dictate that we would reduce our teaching establishment in line with falling pupil rolls. Now, we're choosing not to do that this year because of the rules around teacher numbers, and that's a position that we will monitor. As I mentioned, we are engaging with the Scottish Government on this, and further updates will be provided to committee in due course. Sections 4.9 and 4.10 of the report cover pensions. Firstly, around teachers, I've reported before that the teacher pension contribution from the council has increased this year. We estimate the cost to be £5.5 million. We have been told that the Scottish Government expect funding to be received from the UK Government on this, and that it will be passed on to councils when they get this. So that funding is still awaited. In terms of non-teachers, we've reported previously that there's a temporary reduction in the contribution that the council is making to non-teachers' pension funds. That saving has been agreed that it will be used to help our budget position over the next couple of years. We've now managed to capture that from resources budgets in this year, and it's slightly higher than we expected by just under £400,000. So that will be set aside and used to help with budgets going forward. An update on the children and families position is provided at 4.12. We have reported through this committee and through Social Work Committee the pressures that children and families are facing, and that we have a plan around remedy on that. It was also noted as part of our budget report in February that £7.7 million had been redirected to children and families from the delegated IJB budget to help with the position, and that there's central funding provided to help there as well as they move to balancing their budget going forward. At the bottom of page 29, we're covering the position around the consequentials money that we have mentioned on a couple of occasions to committee. The Scottish Government had committed to passing through consequentials money that the UK Government had provided, and that was a total of £48 million. And that's been topped up to just under £63 million across Scotland of funding that's been made available to councils. Our share of that is £3.7 million. We had reported as part of our update to a committee that we would be looking, and it would be suggested that it would be prudent to set this money aside when an allocation was made in terms of a contingency against higher than budgeted costs of pay. And that's what we're proposing in this paper. We know that the pay award has not yet been agreed for 2024-25, and we know that there's ongoing discussions around that. We also know that the asks around pay are much higher than councils in Scotland have budgeted, so it is prudent that this money is set aside as a contingency for that. 418 covers the transfer of the employability services to Community and Enterprise Resources, where previously it sat within my own resource, Finance and Corporate Resources. The budgets within the appendices to this report have been updated to reflect that transfer. And we're also covering information around a bid process for £1.5 million that the Scottish Government have announced in relation to school meal debt. We will be looking to put in a bid to help write off some of our school meal debt. Transactions around loan charges are covered at 420 and 421, and that's us just enacting moves around our loan charge budget that were previously agreed as part of budget strategies. Section 5 of the report picks up the housing revenue account, and we're reporting a break-even position on that budget. So if I take you back to the recommendations, we're asking that committee approve the following recommendations. Firstly, that the break-even position on the general fund budget and actual spend to the 17th of May is noted, and that the £3.710 million consequentials money be set aside as a contingency for higher than budgeted pay claims be approved, and that the break-even position on the housing revenue account and actual spend also is noted. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much, Jackie, for that report. Can I ask if there are any questions or points at this stage? Could you please indicate now? I come to Maureen Chalmers.
Thanks, Chair. Thank you. I just wanted to ask a question about clarification on recommendation 2. So the wording there is quite specific round about set aside as a contingency for higher than budgeted pay claims. If I go back to the last paper where the money was more for budget strategy, aside for budget strategies and to assist and support that. I suppose I'm just kind of wanting to clarify if other financial pressures come forward, other budget issues come forward, is this money able to be used for that? And I'm thinking particularly of the work round about our halls and libraries and assets, and my growing fear that that's becoming. I've got a question mark around about achievability and sustainability of what's happening just now, and whether we would need to kind of support that with additional funding. So I'm just wanting to ask the question, is the potential there to use this if there is evidence to support the need for further funding there? Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor. The purpose of what was recommended here is that money is set aside for pay, and that would go into the pot to meet the pay award. I think it's highly unlikely that money won't be needed for pay award, given the situation and the offers that are on the table already that haven't been accepted. So I think it's highly unlikely that money will be able to be used for anything else, that it will be needed for pay.
Okay. And I would just reassure the committee about the great progress that has been made in relation to the Community Fight Back Fund and the Future Library Fund, and the investment that this council very wisely decided to put in place to fight back against the cuts that had been imposed on us in real terms. Alec Allison.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. It's around 2.2, the recommendation 2.2 as well. Can fully accept that we need to hold that money at this time in case Scottish Government do not fully fund any of the pay awards. But one of the things we did through the budget was quite rightly secure the roads budget. What I'm not so comfortable with was the way that we decided to finance that. And I think that one of the things that we should be looking at, if funding is available, whether it's because this isn't needed or other funding is made aware, that we look at how we were funding the roads budget, because what we're doing, I do not think, is best use of public funds. But to keep that in mind for the future.
I think we will note the point that you've made before and made again in the committee today. Okay, are there any other questions? I don't see any, so can we agree the recommendations in the report?
Agreed.
We're agreed. Thank you. Could I come now to item 5, which is on the capital budget monitoring final outturn report, and it's back to you, Jackie.
Thank you, Chair. So now we move on to capital. So same as the papers that have gone before for revenue, we're going to cover the year-end position for 2023-24 first. If I take you to section 5, where the information is held on how we performed last year. Now, as always, the appendices will give the detail around the particular spend around capital. But in summary, we have managed £64.2 million of spend on our General Fund Capital Programme for 23-24 financial year. That's an underspend of just over £14 million, and the details of where that's been realised is detailed there at section 5.1. And as we've reported before, the reasons for this is mainly due to the timing of spend of projects over financial years, and we have included in Appendix 2 the main projects that will continue to spend into 2024-25 using the budget that will carry forward from the last financial year, along with estimated completion dates on those. Section 5.4 again covers what was covered in the revenue report around the year-end adjustments that we have to do to make sure that our capital and revenue spend is accounted for in the correct place, and also around the transactions that we've undertaken around the funding that we received for pay award, that we received as capital funding, but has to be used to fund revenue expenditure. At the top of page 37, we refer to our carry forward into 2024-25. That simply reflects the money that we didn't spend in 2023-24, and we're carrying that forward to complete those projects that I mentioned a second ago. So our carry forward is £14.1 million, and that will be picked up as part of the next report in the pack, which looks at the new financial year. Section 5.11 covers our housing programme. The budget for the year for housing was £67.4 million, and we achieved spend of £62.2 million. So that's an underspend of £5.2 million, and that was due to, again, the timing of spend around purchase of land at sites in East Kilbride Community Growth Area and also at Brackenhill Farm, Hamilton, and they settled very early in the new financial year. Again, looking at the carry forward of budget into the new financial year for housing, there would be a carry forward of £5.2 million. We have assessed what of that will be spent in 24-25. So the carry forward will be £3.4 million, and the rest of the funding will be carried forward into future years. There is reference at 5.13 to the Affordable Housing Grant for 24-25. And that has now been confirmed, and as we've again discussed previously, there is a reduction of just under £3.5 million in that grant. That again will be picked up as part of the report on our 24-25 programme, because that obviously affects the amount that we have to spend on capital in the new financial year. So in terms of recommendations at section 2.1, we're asking that the outturn on the General Services programme of £62.2 million be noted, that the carry forward on the General Services Capital Programme of £14.1 million be approved, that the outturn on the Housing Capital Programme of £62.2 million be noted, and that the carry forward of £5.2 million on housing into future capital years again is approved. And the overall spending anticipated in 24-25 is subject to a separate report on this committee also be noted. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Can I ask if there are any questions or contributions at this point? And could I come to Councillor Brown?
Yes, thanks very much, Chair. There's an item at the bottom of page 40 relating to Cathkin Bypass, which I think is the Cathkin Relief Road proposal, and it's all about grants. I think this is compensation payments, which seem to have been going on for a year and a day, to say the least. And I wonder if we had any idea, you can come back to me offline if you want, as to when this will be actually finished with. It's been going on quite literally for yonks, and it's about time it was actually concluded, it seems to me, and I wonder if there's any particular hold-ups. Could someone come back with a report perhaps later on about that?
I think I'm going to bring in David Booth, but I think the answer is yes. David.
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Councillor Brown. Yeah, I think you've highlighted even in your question, this is a result of a complicated number of compensation payments, and sometimes we're at the will of external forces in order to get those across the line. But I'm happy to bring back more information on that. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you very much. If there are no other questions, can we agree the report? Agreed. We're agreed. Could I come now to item 6, which is the capital budget monitoring paper, and it's back to you, Jackie.
Thank you, Chair. So we're now back into the current financial year. For capital, again, reporting the position into the 17th of May. Again, very early on in the year, particularly for capital spend, so nothing of great note around how we're performing this year. But what this paper does do is build up our base budget from what was approved back in February to what we will now report on. I take you to section 4 of the report. Firstly, we're covering general services. At 4.1 on page 44, we are reporting that the base capital programme that was approved in February this year was £49.5 million. And there are adjustments that we have to make to that to get to the level of spend that we would hope to achieve this year. And they are covered in the sections through to 4.10. So quickly pick up on those. Firstly, the carry forward that I mentioned as part of the last report, that £14.1 million will be added to the capital budget for the year. As well, adjustment for £217,000, which reflects funding that came in 23-24 that impacts on the budget and the amount that we have to spend, and that's included there to achieve that expected spend in the year. In terms of previous approvals, we have £1 million of budget that was approved to spend on our Oracle Fusion project, and that is required to bring into the budget, as is the spend on our Leisure and Cultural Transformation Fund that committee approved last month. £8.4 million of that fund is expected to spend this year on capital, and that will be added to the programme. At 4.7, we're mentioning additional funding that we've had for renewal of play parks of just under £900,000. Now, we already have an allocation in for 24-25 for play parks, and as we agree the spend profile of that budget, we haven't added the new monies into the programme yet, but we will do when that clarification on programming is known. Hare Myers Park and Ride is covered at section 4.8, and again this has been the discussion point in papers before. The cost of completing the Park and Ride facility at Hare Myers is estimated around £4.6 million. We have City Deal funding and developer contributions that will cover £2.6 million of that. The balance of £2 million was originally anticipated that would come from SPT. Now, we know that due to funding constrictions in their part, that money will now not be received by the council. However, following discussions with Transport Scotland, we've now agreed that a letter of comfort will be provided from Transport Scotland, and that will state that they will reimburse the council in future years for the £2 million shortfall in this project. So based on that letter of comfort, the council would look to borrow on a short-term basis to fund the project spend, and that would be reimbursed by Transport Scotland. Because of the nature of the agreement here and that we know that the money is forthcoming, we won't have to account for any principal repayments on that borrowing. Therefore, the only liability that we will have is an amount of interest for that short-term borrowing, and that's detailed there at £90,000 per annum. It is expected that Transport Scotland will provide that funding by 2026-27, so it is short-term borrowing that we're talking about here. So at 4.11 of the report, on page 46, you can see there that we have built up the capital programme from that original £49.5 million approved programme, adding in the areas that we've just covered there, and that's getting us to a new revised base programme of £73.850 million. As we would normally do to committee, there are some adjustments that we're looking for approval for to add to that position, and they're detailed there at 4.12 and are included in Appendix 1 for your information. So these are the exceptions that we would ask for approval for to the capital programme, and they include bringing in the funds around our levelling up projects for the Three Rivers and Clydesdale Way projects, and also the Shawfield remediation and development project. There's also additional funding that's been provided for active travel, and also bringing in spend around our Central Energy Efficiency Fund, our CEF programme. And that brings in the additional funds that were included in the budget this year when it was agreed in February. If they're approved, this will bring our total budget for capital in general services to £82.6 million, so a very healthy capital programme for the year. Our housing programme is covered at section 5 of the report, and in the same way, we're looking to build up the programme for the year. So approval was given back in February of a programme of £77.3 million. If we add in our carry forward that was mentioned as part of the last report, that £3.4 million, that would be added to the programme. But we also have to adjust for the movement in the affordable housing grant that again I mentioned earlier. So that reduction of £3.4 million will impact on our approved programme for 24-25. And that will see a reduction of 60 in the number of units that were expected to be purchased on the market purchase scheme. So that's down from 120 to 60, and that would cover the reduction of £3 million in that grant. Should be noted, though, that we have been advised that we will receive a share of £40 million funding for the National Acquisition Programme in 24-25. We haven't yet been advised of what our share of that funding will be, but it may allow up to 30 of those units on the market purchase scheme to be taken on. So taking those things into account, we're left with a revised programme for capital for housing of £77.2 million. I'll go back to the recommendations. At 2.1, we're asking that the General Fund Capital Programme and the Housing Programme be approved, that the borrowing that I mentioned around Hare Myers Park and Ride be agreed, and that the adjustments to the General Fund Programme as listed at Appendix 1 be approved. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Jackie. Can I ask if there are any questions or points? Could you indicate now? Before I come to them, I think I just wanted to say, obviously, this is a report with sort of mixed news for the Council. The point has been made about the impact of the reduction in the affordable housing budget, but equally we've had some very good news in relation to the Hare Myers Park and Ride. It is by no means a perfect solution, but it is a solution, and I just want to put on record my thanks for the officials who have presented the case to government and to civil servants, and to all those in the political sphere who have supported us in looking for funding to be reinstated. In particular, Councillor Watson and Councillor Williams, and all the towns, all the MSPs who represent the town, and our former MP as she is now. I think really across the board there were good, strong representations made to government, and hopefully this outcome means that when we build a new Hare Myers train station, it will be accessible, because that was the ridiculous position we were going to end up in. So thank you very much. Can I come to John Ross?
Yes, thanks very much, Joe. Just a couple of points I would like clarification on. The first is item 4.8, which is Hare Myers Station Park and Ride. And while I look forward to the completion of the park and ride, I'm just wondering why we wouldn't think of taking that money from reserves rather than using a loan system where we're paying back £90,000 each year for the duration of the loan. Could we not use the money that we're saving this year and next year rather than go and borrow money where we're paying back £180,000? Just looking for clarification on that.
Jackie, I'll come to you.
Okay. In terms of reserves, all the reserves that we have been identified for a purpose. Whilst it could be recommended that we could use reserves, it's felt that being able to get £2 million from Transport Scotland has been a significant way forward for us, and we do believe that the £180,000 can be managed within our loan charge budget over the next 2 years, so there should be no impact in terms of that requirement to borrow. We have asked Transport Scotland if they will cover those costs of that additional interest within the money that they've given. We're still to hear back from them, but it could be a way that that's managed.
Thank you. The second point was to do with the Three Rivers project. I'm just wondering, will that money still be forthcoming if we have a change of government? Do we know?
I've no reason to think otherwise. That's the position that we're being told we're getting that money, so there's no reason to believe otherwise.
Can we ask Joe to have a word with Keir? See if we put in a word for us. Thanks.
I'm thinking about all those times you put in a word for us when it came to Scottish Government cuts to this Council's budget, but we have no reason to believe that there is any risk to the Three Rivers project. Alec.
Yeah, thanks, Joe, Chair. It's actually on the same issue. I concur with a lot of what you actually said. To have Hairmire Station built in the middle of a field just wouldn't exactly be very useful. As one of the board members of SPT, we've been quite, we've known about this for a long time. With the Scottish Government's budget to SPT for capital funds being reduced to nothing, it actually suggests so much they actually think about actually how we're going to service our population. I think it is, first of all, thanks to the, I'll join with you in thanking the officers for the work that they have actually done in digging the Scottish Government out of a hole. The fact that they needed to be told that a car park was needed and a railway station in the greenfield was not a way forward is disappointing. The fact that we are also going to find a way of finding that, the interest, if you like, says a lot for our officers as well. And congratulate them on doing that, but just offer my disappointment that we are having to dig the Scottish Government out of their self-created hole.
Noted. There are no other questions. Can I ask us to agree the recommendations?
Agreed.
Okay. Come back to Jackie again. Item 7 this time, which is about additional funding. So Jackie, I think this is your last paper for the day. Back to you.
Thank you, Chair. A simpler report. This is a regular report on additional funding that we have received. The appendices show the detail. Appendix 1, we're showing that additional revenue funding of 542,000 has been received. That's around discretionary housing payments and employability. Around capital, Appendix 2 shows that we're receiving £2.778 million of additional funding. Some of that relates to public sector heat carbonisation fund monies from the government, and that's in relation to Our Lady of Lourdes Primary School in East Kilbride, active travel funding that I mentioned as part of the last report, and also the grant for play parks. So we're asking that the additional funding is noted. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, and I'll correct myself because we've got to hear from you again very shortly. On the revenue budget paper, are there any questions or points on that report? I don't see any. So can we agree the recommendations?
Agreed.
Agreed. We'll come now to the Employee Workforce Monitoring Information Report, and Michelle Milne is going to speak to that. Michelle.
Thank you and good morning. This is a report that is presented to Executive Committee annually on workforce monitoring. You do receive updates during the year on this as well. I'll highlight some areas of the report. At section 4, you will see that the Council's average absence rate for that year was 5.4, which was a decrease of 0.3%. And under that, there is a breakdown in terms of the absence figures in terms of our occupational groups within the Council. You also see in the report at the top of page 60 that psychological and musculoskeletal absences remain our highest reasons for absence, and you'll see that those have increased in the second and third bullet points there. And you'll also see at the last two bullet points that stomach, bowel, blood and metabolic disorders and respiratory conditions have also decreased in terms of the number of days absence. At section 5, occupational health, you will see that 1,493 employees were referred for medical examination during that period, and there was just short of 2,000 employees who attended physiotherapy treatment. And of that, 67% of those employees remained at work while they were receiving treatment. Over the year, just over 1,900 employees were referred to the Employee Support Officer, and of those employees, 87% had stated that this was related to personal reasons, that they were seeking some support. At section 6, accidents and incidents, there was 1,879 accidents and incidents recorded during this period, and of that, 1,820 were minor accidents and incidents. And you'll see at the bottom section of that page the number of accidents and incidents that led to some absences during that period as well. At section 7, that highlights the activity during the year related to discipline, grievance and dignity at work. There were 175 disciplinary hearings during that period, and action was taken in 161 of those cases. Also highlight, during that period there were 14 appeals submitted to the appeals panel. 1 was upheld in part, 9 were not upheld, and 4 appeals were withdrawn during that period. At section 8, you'll see a significant amount of activity in terms of employee development, so that's support, learning and development for our employees. And during that period, there were just over 12,000 attendances at classroom learning and development events. There were 4,396 attendances at virtual classroom learning and development events, and there were just over 125,000 e-learning packages that were delivered during that period as well. At section 9, there is information on labour turnover and analysis of leavers and exit interviews. And you'll see that the Council's labour turnover figure for April 23 to March 23 is 4.7%. At 9.2, there were 713 leavers eligible for an exit interview. 224 exit interviews were carried out, which represented 31%. Moving on to the next page, page 62, at 9.4. You'll see there is a summary there of the number of employees who left employment in that year, which is 1,754. You'll see there that over 1,500 posts were replaced, 44 were filled on a temporary basis, and that can be due to the nature of the work carrying out or funding associated with that. 78 posts were due to the end of fixed term contracts. 37 posts were being left vacant pending savings or service reviews, and we'll see that showing differently in the first quarter of the report of next year when some of those decisions have been made for going forward. And 7 posts were removed for savings. Again, at section 10, there's some information on recruitment monitoring. A quick summary there. There's 96% of applicants who had completed equal opportunities monitoring forums. Of that, 529 applicants had declared themselves as disabled, and 284 were shortlisted and 35 were appointed. 1,900 applicants were received from the Black and ethnic minority background group, and 538 were shortlisted and 57 were appointed. We also received 161 applications from candidates who had declared themselves as veterans. 82 were shortlisted for interview and 3 were appointed. There's further information contained in section 11 around the staffing watch, and there are no implications to flag in relation to the report. I would refer committee back to the recommendations at section 2 to note the employment information as detailed in the list at 2.1.1. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Michelle. Can I ask if there are any questions or points on that report? And could I come to Richard Nelson?
Thank you, Chair. It was just about Appendix 8 on page 71, about the absence classifications, and Michelle touched on about the psychological and musculoskeletal increasing. My main concern was about the psychological part of it, and I have raised it on numerous occasions in committee, and I have been told that we are doing X, Y and Z to reduce this number. Is it maybe that the X, Y and Z isn't working? Because this number is rising year on year. And I'm wondering, Chair, if we need to look at a paper that comes back to this committee to show us what we're actually doing and to show us these numbers in a better way and what we're doing to try and get that number down, because it doesn't seem to be going down, it seems to be going up, and that's a concern that we need to get the right things in place for our staff members.
Okay, I'll come back to Michelle, and maybe, Michelle, are there any Is there any evidence base that we're gathering around what might be driving that increase in the psychological cases? Michelle?
So we do gather information, and you'll see at page 60 in the report that 87% of these referrals were related to personal issues, just in terms of the reasons that people have given us for that. But notwithstanding that, it's a complicated situation in terms of the world that we're living in just now, and some of the challenges facing some of our employees. We do have a full range of activity that we do change and adapt every year, and we have grown, but actually I would be very keen to bring back some information to committee on the work that we are doing. We summarised that for ourselves recently, so that would be very easily to pull together and bring back.
Quite happy with that. Okay, if there are no other questions, can we agree the report?
Agreed.
And I will come back to Jackie. The first of our items of decision, and this is on the revenue budget strategy. Jackie.
Thank you, Chair. This is normal at this time of the year that we would bring our budget strategy paper to you for the coming year. You will see by the title of this report we're looking to a slightly longer term view, and we'll go into the reasons for that in a second. I'm going to start at section 3 of the report, which is giving us a bit of the background to where we're at, and it will point to the main focus areas within the report. Firstly, a reminder on our report that we brought back in January to committee on our budget strategy, and that had a position for what we expected our budget gap to be in the coming years. And that pointed to a figure of £75.1 million of a budget gap covering the years 2025-26 to 2027-28, so a 3-year period. And what this paper will do is look at an update on where we now think that budget gap will be. The rest of page 83 covers what we perceive the position to be nationally around finance, and it'll be no great surprise to you that we don't see a positive position in terms of how our budget gap will move. In short, we're anticipating that our costs will continue to grow and that grants will not match those cost increases, and that will leave that budget gap that we've talked about before. And that's a similar position that's presented across Scotland and picked up in Audit Scotland reports, as you can see at the top of page 84. The scale of what we're facing is greater than ever. You know, the magnitude of our budget gap is off the back of many years of having to make savings, and I don't think there's any dispute that we do have to have a fundamental rethink on what we can do going forward, and that will be in terms of what we deliver and how we deliver services going forward. I mentioned that this is a longer term view than we've perhaps presented before at this time of the year, and that just reflects the magnitude of the ask over the next 3 years. So we very much have a mind to the next 3 years in terms of how we will manage that budget gap. So this paper will look to set the scene for that medium-term strategy, and section 4 of the report will cover the figures and what we think that budget gap will be. We will go on to talk about how we can look to address that gap, and that will include what we're calling our transformational change programme. And we also have to look at the timelines that we're looking at in terms of moving to getting a budget approved for next year, and also looking at other information that we will also consider for things around reserves and financial resilience, and obviously around consultation and communication. So we'll cover that as we go through the report. So at section 4 of the report, this is really where the main business around what we expect our budget gap is covered. And as you will remember from previous reports on the budget, there are a number of items that make up our budget gaps over the years. And they're summarised for you at table 1 on page 85. All of the details behind these figures are included within the appendices, and we have put in table 1 the link to the particular part of the appendices that detail the breakdown of those particular areas. There are areas that, again, you will be familiar with. We know that the cost of pay and pensions will increase going forward. We've included an element on how we expect our grant movement to be over the next 3 years, and I'll come back to that in a second. We've included what we're calling here the reinstatement and impact of prior year budget decisions. Again, this isn't a new thing for our budget position as we're reporting just now. This is us simply reflecting the need to reinstate budget to cover decisions in previous years where we've used one-off pots of money. We're including additional costs around contract inflation, and that includes things like non-domestic rates around our contracts around secondary schools and around utilities and social care and school transport. We also have to include the additional costs of revenue from capital decisions that we've made, and that is around schools projects, and also we build in the benefits that we can get from increased council tax from additional properties in our area. So all of that's summarised at table 1 for you, and at the bottom right hand corner of that table, that is our revised budget gap, and that's £77.275 million. So that is an increase on the previously reported budget gap of £75 million, and that's mainly attributable to decisions that we took in the 24-25 budget, and I'll cover those in a second, as well as movements in our higher assumptions for pay award and around our assumptions on utilities. So the first of these changes is around the budget decisions that we made in 24-25, and that's covered at section 4.5. So as part of our budget decisions this year, we had 2 savings that were using reserves to meet those savings, and they're detailed there for you. Because they are using one-off pots of money, we have to build that back into the budget to look to make permanent savings going forward. And that totalled £2.5 million. So that is the main reason why our budget gap has moved. But on the top of page 86, we also refer to pay awards. Now, as I've mentioned already this morning, we know that the position around pay awards going forward is unknown. What we have tried to do is build in an assumption around what pay awards could be, but that was at a point in time, and as I've said earlier, it's a very movable position in terms of what our pay award position will be. So taking into account the agreement earlier on to include the consequentials money in our pay award and what we have here, it's giving us a position where we have a budget for a position on pay award. Utilities is covered at section 4.7. Now, we do know that we are seeing a downward trend in the prices for utilities. This is off the back of many years of having to put in significant sums of money into the budget for utilities. We have adjusted our assumptions going forward by £2 million to the good. So we are identifying that we should expect our prices to come down. Going forward, we are still uncertain about the overall impact of that downward trend in prices. We are part of the consortium who buy energy across Scottish public authorities, and the units of energy that we have purchased for future years is only small, so it's hard to be able to see what the actual real impact of those downward prices will be. We'll keep committee updated on that, but that is something that I would expect to update us on when we update our budget going forward. So that's the main reasons for the movement in our budget gap. I've also noted at 4.9 and 4.10 some of the position around our assumptions on income. Firstly, government grant. We have included a position on our expectation of government grant that pretty much reflects flat cash, except for in 26-27. And that built in a position that was presented in the Scottish Government Spending Review back in 2022. That suggested that money would be added into local government in 26-27. Now, I appreciate that was 2 years ago and that we are expecting an updated medium-term financial strategy from the Scottish Government. Now, that has been delayed because of the election, but we will keep our eye on that because that is a risk that that expectation doesn't materialise. And in relation to council tax, covered at 4.10 in the report, there has been no assumption around council tax in that budget gap that I've presented, but we have presented there, as we normally would, what a 1% increase in council tax could achieve in terms of income, and that would be an additional £1.6 million. So section 4, just to summarise, is taking us to a current position on our expected budget gap over the next 3 years. We will continue to monitor and adjust that position for any changes that take place. But we do appreciate that that's a substantial gap to close in the next 3 years. And that's why at section 5 we go on to point to how we can look to manage that going forward. And this section starts to point to what we're calling a transformational change programme. We do appreciate that we will have to significantly change how we deliver services over the next 3 years. And this section in the report points to the plan around that. What we do currently around service change isn't new. We've been building on a programme of reviews for a number of years, and we've reported that back in the form of savings to committee. But what we are suggesting in this paper is that that foundation for that transformational change programme will be a series of cross-cutting reviews, and they're detailed at section 5.3 for your information. They're not focused on one particular resource, but council-wide activities, and you can see there that includes charging and procurement, overtime and management structure, as well as work around our fleet and depots and loans fund. I have pulled out the property review that's mentioned within that list at section 5.4. It's worthy of particular mention here, particularly because the challenges we're facing going forward. We know that the council has a vast estate of properties, and we also know the challenges that we're facing around moving to net zero and how we as a council would look to progress this, because there are significant costs associated with doing that. So this review will look at how the council uses property. It'll cover all resources and our partners, including leisure, and all areas of service delivery. The challenge here is to make sure that we have the right size of portfolio that's affordable, it's fit for purpose, and importantly, it's sustainable and allows us to move towards those net zero targets that we are facing. And that is in the environment where we have no additional funding being made available at this point in time to contribute towards net zero. We'll have to look at co-location opportunities, and that is likely to mean that options around reducing the number of properties may come forward, and that will form part of that review. The cross-cutting reviews are underway, and any outcome from those will be reported back to committee, but we are looking to use the Performance and Review Scrutiny Forum to allow updates on those reviews to be presented. But it is unlikely that those cross-cutting reviews will be enough to manage that budget gap, so alongside that, resources are also manage their own service reviews around the services where we are able to look to make proposals later on in the year to members on savings to help manage that budget gap. If I move on to section 6, there's a summary there of what's already been covered in the report, and also points to a timetable on how we take this forward. And you can see that timeline, it's at table 2 on page 88. So that takes us from today's meeting of the strategy being presented, and takes us through a proposal around presenting a seminar for members in August on the budget position, and then leading in to the budget consultation process. And that would allow us to build on the really good work that we had last year around budget consultation and the engagement with members, with the public, and also with our staff. We would expect that we would have a budget update for committee around November, and then we would hopefully receive our budget settlement in December, allowing us to bring back an update after the new year on our budget and get approval in February. Section 6.6 covers the reinstatement of previously agreed temporary use of funding. Again, this is how we would normally report that within this report, and it points to the sums that we have included within our budget gap that are as a result of those decisions. I would point out that the table on page 89 that covers these temporary solutions and the reinstatement shows that by 28-29 there is no need for us to undertake this process. We will have reinstatement required. Section 7 and Section 8 of the report are covering a couple of areas that will be presented in future. Firstly, a reserve strategy. When we have completed our year-end process, we will be looking to bring back to the Finance and Corporate Committee an update on our reserves strategy. There is guidance around the level of reserves that is held, and that points towards the Council and myself being comfortable in terms of our local circumstances on the level of reserves that we hold. So we will bring back a report to the Finance and Corporate Resources Committee on that in the autumn, following the completion of our annual accounts process. On financial resilience, it's a very topical area given the pressures in local government. And last year's audit report actually picked up that there is an opportunity for greater focus across all councils on financial resilience. Now, we are confident that through our budget strategy and the work that we do, that we are a resilient council, but again, we will look to bring back a fuller paper on that to the Risk and Audit Scrutiny Committee in the autumn. Touched already on communications and engagement with elected members and public consultation, and that's covered at section 9 of the report. And sections 10 and 13 pick up on our requirements to cover our impact assessments around things like equality impact and also on climate change. Just in terms of closing off this report, I would draw your attention to section 14 of the report. We have highlighted a number of specific risks around the budget. We will continue to update our assumptions as new information becomes available, but we have noted down some of these assumptions that may be subject to change, including things like pay award and utilities that I mentioned earlier. So if I take us back to the recommendations in the report, we are asking at section 2.1 that the budget position for 2025-26 to 2027-28 and the budget gap be approved, that the transformational change programme that I talked about in section 5 also is noted, as is the summary and next steps that covered in section 6 also be noted, and that the reserve strategy and the financial resilience piece will be reported back to committees in the autumn also be noted, and that the risks are noted. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much, Jackie. That was a very comprehensive paper, and I think one of the most comprehensive financial strategy papers we've had in many years. Can I ask if there are any questions or points in relation to that paper? Can I come to Robert Brown?
Yes, thanks very much, Chair. It's, well, first of all, thank you to Jackie and her team for the report. I think it's a really very comprehensive, if depressing, report that we have to deal with here. I wanted to ask just one, I suppose, relatively minor thing. 5.6 of the appendix refers to the insurance fund, and that's come to prominence in my area recently with the unfortunate arson attack on the Overton Park bandstand, where obviously these things are not insured in the normal way. I wondered, first of all, if the insurance fund is going to be part of the review of property. That's, I think, one of the reviews going forward to make sure we get all that right. And secondly, whether it covers things like the Overton Park bandstand, or whether it's just more, if you like, buildings and properties, if you like, that are covered in that particular way. I think we self-insure quite a lot of this stuff through the insurance fund, quite rightly, because I think it saves us insurance premiums, but it does have some risks with it as well.
Jackie?
Yep, thank you. Yep, you're absolutely right. We do undertake a process of self-insurance, and that does save us on premiums for insurance, and that's the right way to do this, and that reflects what a number of other councils do as well. A review of the insurance fund wouldn't be part of the property review per se, but it is something that we constantly on an annual basis look to make sure that the budget that we have for insurance and any balance that is there is sufficient going forward, and that's why we've identified that it just needs a top up going forward. I mentioned earlier about the bill that we had from Glasgow around claims from Strathclyde Regional Council days and before, particularly around abuse claims at the moment. That is expected to continue in terms of what we have to pay on that, and that's why we keep our insurance fund constantly under review.
Thank you.
Okay, could I come to Richard Nelson?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, again, thanks to Jackie for a very detailed report, and I'm sure people who are watching and listening online may be concerned and worried by the impacts it may face their communities going forward, especially when we're trying to hit net zero, and we have a lot of rural places that probably don't meet that requirement, and they're probably a bit worried. It's probably not a question, more a comment, and that I hope that the Scottish Government this year work with local councils and they don't impose things on us that doesn't work. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much. I don't see any other hands or any other points, so can I ask that we agree the report?
Agreed.
We're agreed. Come now to, I am aware that we've been going on for some time, and so I'll maybe take a break shortly, but I think we still have time to get through some business. So I'll come to item 10, which is the South Lanarkshire Council Armed Forces Community Covenant, and Michelle Milne is going to speak to this report. Michelle.
Thank you. This report is seeking approval for a new Armed Forces Community Covenant Strategy and Action Plan which builds on the work that's already been carried out by the Council to date around the Armed Forces Covenant Duty and the Community Covenant. You will see at the background at section 3 that there have been previous reports to South Lanarkshire Council in June 2019 and in January 2024. Information in terms of the key areas that have been covered in those reports is detailed below at the bottom of page 101. At page 102, at section 3.2 to section 3.4, you will see detail there in terms of when the Council signed up to the Covenant and the Covenant aims, and further down at section 3.6 on that page you'll also see details of the Council's recommitment to this. At section 3.5 you will be familiar with the work of the Lanarkshire Firm Base Group and its renaming, which is detailed at section 3.5 there. At section 3.7, this provides information on the Armed Forces Covenant Duty as reported in January 24 and the principles which need to be considered in terms of what that we're doing here within the Council. Section 4 details the current position around the duty and the strategy that the Council has developed. You'll see at section 4.1, it means that decisions that we make within the Council about the development and delivery of certain services must be made and must be conscious of consideration of the needs of the Armed Forces community. At 4.2, you will see we are flagging that officers have now developed the South Lanarkshire Council Armed Forces Covenant Strategy, which is also aligned to the Council Connect plans in terms of date orientation. 4.3 details the consultation that has taken place to date. And at section 4.4 you'll see that in doing and develop this strategy we have aligned that to the Lanarkshire Armed Forces Community and Veterans Covenant Group Handbook, and there is a link detailed below in the report for you to be able to have a look at that. At section 4.5 you'll see detailed the following Council services in the service areas that are covered by the Act, which are detailed there and primarily cover housing and technical resources, education resources, health and social care, but you'll know that that also relates to all other resources just in terms of recruitment activity, in terms of support. In terms of next steps, which is on page 104, at 5.2, we would request that we form a cross-service officer group to drive forward delivery of the strategy and the action plan and to continue to develop this where it is appropriate to do that. At 5.3, as part of the delivery of the action plan and implementation of the Council's Armed Forces strategy, we want to ensure that the Council continue to work towards achieving the Gold Award. We have the Silver Award status just now as part of the Defence Employer Recognition Scheme, and we progress that as part of the action plan, and that will be included in the next annual report. I would also flag that as part of this we have identified resource champions, and we can share information on that in terms of taking this forward. There are no employee financial, climate change or other implications related to this report. But I would also want to say that at section 10, you'll see that an impact assessment has been undertaken in terms of this strategy. And if the strategy is approved, that will be published on the Council website. It's also important to note at 10.2, this strategy and action plan highlight the steps that we are taking forward in terms of meeting the Council requirements in terms of the Armed Forces Community Covenant and the statutory Armed Forces Covenant duty. We will also update the trade unions, and as also mentioned already in the report, there are indications of who we have consulted during this process in terms of the development of the strategy and action plan to date. So I would refer committee back to section 2, the recommendations, which are that the Council's Armed Forces Community Covenant Strategy and Action Plan be approved, and that it be noted an annual report on the Council's work in promoting the Armed Forces Covenant will be reported to South Lanarkshire Council in January 2025. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Michelle, before I take any questions, as this is Armed Forces Week, I suppose, as we've marked Armed Forces Day at the weekend, and I know that others will be doing that later, I maybe just want to take the opportunity to thank everyone that's been a part of that, and including our own Armed Forces champion, Mark Horsham. He's not a member of this committee, but he's obviously, you see his words in the report, and he's been representing the Council this week and has been a part of formulating the papers that have come before us on this subject over a number of years. Are there any questions? And can I come to Richard Nelson?
Thank you, Chair. And firstly, may I just thank yourself, Paul, and Ian for working with me over the past few days and bringing forward this amendment to the document that's in front of us. With more than 20,000 ex-Armed Forces veterans residing in Lanarkshire alone, and many of our Armed Forces personnel transitioning back to civilian life, it is surprising to see that the Covenant before us today does not address justice, unpaid work or non-custodial sentences. Over the past few months, I have the privilege of working with alongside Who Dares Cares and the About Turn Positive Futures programme run by the Unpaid Service here in South Lanarkshire Council. This superb programme, supported by Who Dares Cares and other veteran charities through an SLA, aids veterans who have received non-custodial sentences. It is specifically designed to assist them in rehabilitation and reintegration into our communities. Many veterans find it difficult to return to normal civilian life after their service, impacting upon their mental health and well-being, and this can often lead to them committing offences. Whilst we do not condone their actions, it is important to recognise that the triggers for their behaviour often stem from experiences and circumstances that few civilians can ever fully comprehend. This programme is a success story for South Lanarkshire Council, the Unpaid Service and for social work. It is crucial that we acknowledge and support these efforts to rehabilitate and care for our veterans who might otherwise be forgotten. The programme at Auchentibber is comprehensive, covering various aspects such as reflection through physical activity, engaging with external agencies, health and well-being, community engagement, and learning basic cooking skills, which can be particularly challenging for veterans adapting to civilian life. The aims and vision of the Covenant in front of us state, and I quote, "Recognise the value of service for personnel, recognise the sacrifices made by the Armed Forces. We have a duty of care to our Armed Forces and dependents. Following Armed Forces Day on Saturday, I think it's imperative that we continually recognise that some of our veterans can continue to face significant challenges upon returning to normal civilian life and may end up in the justice system. By incorporating justice into this covenant, we take a vital step towards providing a far superior, more robust approach to supporting our veterans, allowing them to better reintegrate into our society and live their lives as far more than just being forgotten soldiers. So having reviewed this covenant before us today, I propose that we make this amendment to include justice, unpaid work and non-custodial sentences. And with that, including in there mental health, substance misuse and adding on justice services at the end. This requires a wee bit more work, Chair, and with your indulgence, I would like to work with the officers and our Armed Veterans Champion, Councillor Horsham, to reach some wording that we can add into this strategy to include those. And I hope that everybody in the Chamber can support this amendment to this covenant. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor Nelson. So the suggestion there is that there are some areas that it would be beneficial to include in the strategy that relate to what Councillor Nelson has just set out around unpaid work, reoffending and prevention. I think Ian wants to come in just to speak on that, and I'll allow him to do that, but it certainly sounds like a positive suggestion that we should take on board and work on and come back with a proposal to the Council later. But Ian, can I come to you?
Yeah, okay. Thank you, Chair. Yes, we discussed with Councillor Nelson about this, and I think that would be fine, but I think it's sensible as he proposes to take it away, and maybe what we'd suggest is delegate authority down to Jackie as relevant Executive Director to sort that wording out in consultation with Councillor Nelson, Councillor Horsham as the champion, and I think also Professor Sengupta as Health and Social Care Director. But I think we'd be supportive of that.
Okay. Could we agree the report with that with that recommendation? Yeah. We're agreed. Okay. Thank you very much to everyone for that. I'm very aware of time and that we still have a bit of business to get through. So could I suggest I make it just almost 20 past. Could I suggest we reconvene here at 11:30? Okay, 11:30. We'll have a 10-minute break. Thanks. It's not coming through in the speaker. It's past now, so if you could return to your seats. We're just going to make sure we've got everybody here that needs to be here. Yeah, and that's a good point. Actually, when you return, could I remind you to put your cards back into your machines, so that it's helpful to identify who's in the chamber. Right, okay. Thank you, folks. We'll resume the meeting now. And can we come to item 11, which are recommendations referred by the Community and Enterprise Resources Committee. And can I ask Ian Strachan to speak to the report?
Thank you, Chair. The purpose of the report to request approval of the following items referred to the Executive Committee by the Community and Enterprise Resources Committee of the 18th of June, and that's in respect of the Council's Bereavement Services Strategy 24-33 and the introduction of a charge for the uplift of household garden waste burgundy bin. In terms of the first matter, the Bereavement Services Strategy, the report summarises what the committee considered on the 18th of June, and we have a link to the actual report in there. And the committee recommended to the Executive Committee that the Bereavement Strategy for South Lanarkshire 24-33, including a crematorium service time pilot and introduction of new and harmonised charges, be approved. Secondly, again, in respect of the proposed charge for uplift of household garden waste burgundy bin, the report summarises what the committee considered and is a link to the actual report. And the committee decided that the matter be referred without endorsement to the Executive Committee for decision. And then in terms of the recommendations before you, asked to approve firstly that the South Lanarkshire Council Bereavement Services Strategy 24-33 be approved, that the new crematorium service time pilot be approved and the new and harmonised charges be approved. And secondly, that in relation to the introduction of a charge for the uplift of household garden waste burgundy bins, the proposal to introduce the charge be approved. The increase of the waste services establishment by 4 full-time equivalent on a temporary basis and 9 FTE on a permanent basis be approved, and that the increase of the vehicle establishment for waste services be approved.
Okay. Thank you very much. Can I ask, in the first instance, if there are any questions or points in relation to this paper? And can I come to Ian McCallan?
Thank you, Chair. Like at the Community Enterprise meeting, we move against the recommendation of a charge, which is recommendation 2A. A, because it's completely unacceptable to introduce additional costs to the public during a cost of living crisis. And B, we all know the Scottish Government will make garden waste collection managed in the near future. Why not wait until legislation is introduced? This will save the not insignificant startup costs and allow time for the Council to tailor an approach which meets the legislative requirements and, crucially, these of our communities, both rural and urban. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor McCallan. If it's all right, I would like to come back to the issue of motions and amendments. Maybe just see if there are any other questions in the paper itself first. So I'll come back to you and ask you to identify a seconder shortly. Can I come to Alec Allison?
Thanks, Chair. I want to first of all ask on bereavement service strategy, unless I've missed it in the papers, is there anything within the strategy about increasing the amount of consecrated ground that is available? I am aware out in Clydesdale that there is at least one cemetery now full, and well, not the people who are using it, but their relatives are being directed elsewhere. And there is another one I'm believing, near capacity. Yet there does not seem to be any work being done to extend these cemeteries. Is there anything, should that not be in the strategy? I have other issues on the burgundy bins, but can we have that first?
Right. Okay. I'm going to come to see if Kevin or Irene or Kevin, but probably more likely Kevin, I think, on that could respond to that.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks for the question, Councillor Allison. So members will be aware that last year the resource brought a cemetery strategy paper to Community and Enterprise Resources Committee. I think it was last April, and that was the first stage in the development of the bereavement services strategy. So cemeteries first, and then bringing the full bereavement strategy this year that incorporated the crematorium. And the cemetery strategy proposed a catchment approach to managing layer capacity. So we did an analysis on an area basis on our cemetery capacity, and that said that we had enough cover for at least the next 5 years, and committee approved that type of approach to managing capacity, and it will be under review every 5 years. So rather than looking at per individual cemetery, we're now looking at it as a geographic location and analysing capacity in that way.
Yes, I'm sorry, I'm not on Community and Enterprise, so I wasn't aware that that paper had went through. It does leave me with some concerns because people, the layers are not within what they would consider their community. I think one of the areas, Carluke, I think, are being currently sent to Lanark. Is what I have been informed. So I've been informed. I don't know if it's true. I certainly know Carstairs Village is full, and they are being sent to Lanark, and that is out with their own communities. And I think it's something we do need to consider.
Right. I think the
Carluke's not full, but I'm told it's nearly full.
Right. I'll maybe come back to Kevin in just a second to kind of clarify on that. I know that this has been a subject before that was addressed in previous papers, and obviously there are capital implications. But we were certainly trying to maximise the use of some of our existing sites. Kevin, can I come back to you?
Sure, thanks, Chair. And it's worth highlighting 2 other areas of work, again, that was agreed through the cemetery strategy, and I think we've tried to give an update in the bereavement strategy on it as well. And it's 2 areas of work that we haven't really undertaken in the past, and that's one, we're trying to recover underutilised space within our cemeteries. So some that are near capacity or have been closed, we're now actively looking at if there's any other areas that we can open, so removing hedgerows and the like to increase capacity. And the second area is trying to recover the right of burial. So we got approval last year now for those layers that haven't been used in the last 60 years to try and recover the right. So you'll know yourself, Councillor Allison, that there's many layers in some of our older cemeteries that just have never been used. We've never tried to recover the right of burial. The paper bereavement strategy highlights that we're starting to do that in some of our cemeteries that have now closed. So you'll see over the next few months some publicity around that, because part of the legislation around it means we must advertise to make sure that people who have bought layers in the past are aware that we are now trying to recover the right of burial. What that means in the long run is, you know, if people that we identify still have the layers and don't require to use them, we can buy it back. And if people are deceased now and we aren't able to identify those layer holders, we're able to recover those layers and put them back into use. So we're trying to proactively, you know, your point's well made, but we're taking action. I'm hoping to address that over the medium term.
Yeah, well, thanks for that. I wasn't aware, so apologies for that. Just to say I'm not intending using any of them in the near future. Could I also just comment on the second point of this, the burgundy bins? I mean, out in the rural area, I'm certainly concerned that we do not get coverage, and there is a 2-tier service regarding those. And trying to find a way forward. Should we be paying for something that may be becoming compulsory? How do we go forward? Is it something we could get confirmation on? Is it something that's going to happen? Is it something that's just been talked about? where are we, so that we can take maybe an informed decision as to whether or not, or how we conclude in the rural area?
Okay, I see some hands are coming in. I suspect there's going to be a mix of contributions on the bereavement strategy and then on the subject of the waste permits. I'm going to defer to Kevin, but the circular economy bill, I believe, was voted on last night. We are no further forward in terms of having a clear timescale as to when this statutory waste stream is introduced, and that the Scottish Government then supports councils with the costs of uplift in delivering that scheme. If I take, for example, pavement parking legislation, you know, that was a very long time us waiting to see how legislation translated into regulation, translated into codes of practice. It is not likely to be imminent, and a number of other authorities have taken the decision to introduce a charge earlier this year, knowing that this is not likely to be imminent. And I'll just be honest, this has been put in front of me before, shortly after I became the leader of the council, and I took the view that we did not want to press ahead with this if we thought we would be building a scheme simply to collapse it in short order. But this is not likely to happen in short order. All the indications are that we could be waiting some time to actually get to the point where the government are reimbursing councils and addressing the costs that councils are incurring by delivering a garden waste stream. Right. I'm going to defer to Kevin, who maybe would be able to give a more professional, the professionals' account of that. Kevin.
Thanks for the optimism, Chair. Yeah, so the real-time update on the circular economy bill, there was a motion passed on Monday that the bill should be considered and voted on today in Chambers. So last week when I presented to Community and Enterprise Resource Committee, all we knew that it was at stage 3, which was final amendments and vote. So that's changed this week. Having checked the Parliament website, there is a very long list of amendments that will be considered and debated today. My reading of that final version of the bill itself doesn't include any direct reference of mandatory garden waste collections. But one of the provisions of the bill is it looks to create a statutory code of practice for household waste recycling for the first time. There is one at the moment, but it doesn't have any statutory underpinning. So if that comes out in the final version, and it likely will, what that means is there will be a further statutory process undertaken then to develop a code of practice. So again, given the timescales that we've experienced in that in the past, in terms of statutory processes, there'll be full consultation with local authorities, with COSLA and stakeholders, and that will happen multiple times in the development of the code of practice, similar to the bill. So I can't say much more on it. I can't offer any kind of guarantees. We're kind of dealing with a real-time situation, but that's how I would see it moving forward.
Thank you. And thank you for correcting me. I think Parliament will be voting into tonight on the circular economy bill, not last night. Okay. Can I take some more points, and I'll come back to the issue of how we deal with the recommendations in front of us. So can I come to Leslie MacDonald?
Thanks, Chair. It would come as no great surprise. It's regarding the burgundy bins. In Larkhall, we have a number of terraced houses who don't have any bins because of their situation. They have nothing, no rear access, and we have tried for years to get maybe special bags that they could put their grass in. At the moment, what they have to do is take them up to the refuse centre. A lot of people here are getting elderly and they're not driving anymore. Is there anything that we can do? Because there's no point in them getting a burgundy bin. There's nowhere for it. They don't have any bins at all. They constantly, every week, have to put out bags. Is there anything that we can do to help these people?
I'm going to make a suggestion in just a moment, but before I do that, I'm going to see if Kevin maybe wants to address that, and could you perhaps also clarify the extent to which the proposal would apply, because we do have obviously a number of flatted properties that have different arrangements around recycling and waste.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks for the question, Councillor MacDonald. So yeah, you're more aware than most that some long-standing issues, you know, with some of our properties in South Lanarkshire, particularly the old traditional minor rose properties that are kind of prevalent in Larkhall. They don't have the same waste service that we have elsewhere, and generally that's because they don't have the capacity to store the bin infrastructure that many other properties in South Lanarkshire do. So we've left some of that optional for residents. So if they're happy, you know, to have bins and take them through the house, they can do so. Most choose don't to do so, which isn't a surprise. If they have space at the front, they can store bins at the front. And again, you know, that doesn't suit all properties again, because there isn't in some locations there isn't, you know, the footpath structure. So I don't have an answer that will fit all, but as you know, we're happy to make assessments per household. You know, if there's adjustments that we can make with the bin infrastructure or the service itself in a household, we're happy to do that. And your second point, sorry, Chair, was?
It was just to see it probably follows on from what you've just described. Obviously, we've got a number of flatted properties. We have other properties that may be particularly hard to reach. Currently, they'll have different arrangements when it comes to recycling and waste collection. I'm just wondering if you could explain how the changes proposed in relation to the permit scheme might affect those properties. No change, I suspect, but you might want to just clarify.
Okay. Thanks, Chair. So we have around 110,000 households in South Lanarkshire that currently have the Burgundy bin service, and this proposal covers them, but it also covers the 5,200 properties in rural Clydesdale that don't currently have the service. So the remainder of households, as you suggest, are, you know, in those that don't have the main service or in flatted or communal properties. And the service there actually varies on the type of flats and again, the space requirements, you know, so if we can get communal recycling facilities in there, you know, we do it wherever we can. Some others just don't. So, and as you know, flats, they don't have gardens, so they wouldn't be part of this scheme anyway.
Can I come to Margaret Cooper?
Thank you, Chair. It's regarding the bereavement strategy. I worked for years with Alistair McKinnon and etc. to try to get an addition onto the cemetery up in Straven. The cemeteries are full there, and I note that Kevin has said that they're going around looking to see where they can add in extra burial sites by removing trees, etc. But we were told, or I was told, that not every town is entitled to have a cemetery. And people from the Straven area were being referred to Larkhall or Stonehouse to bury their relatives. It's a large, I suppose Alec will maybe sympathise with this, but in a large rural community made up of farms where people have lived for generations and their family are buried for generations in the local cemetery, that's where they want to have their relatives buried close by and in the town, but that didn't seem to be possible. I think that we're lacking in transparency in regard to the bereavement service, that there should be a part on the website where people can go and see what capacity there is within their local cemetery so that they have a choice when they go along to the undertaker. They have to, for some people, that's the first time they've heard that there's no space in their local cemetery and they have to look elsewhere. And that can be quite distressing for people. I do think that we should have something on the website that people can refer to and know in advance what the capacity is within their local area. So, for example, if they've managed to identify another 10 areas across the cemeteries in Straven, that should be made public, that people know that there are 10 areas. I know that in the past people could buy a plot and have it for years and not use it. And now that you can only buy the plot after you're dead, well, the relatives can only buy it once the person's deceased. But I do think we need to be a bit more transparent about the fact that not all towns are going to have continuation of a cemetery in them. And we should also be more transparent about what capacity there remains within a particular area. I wondered if Kevin could contribute to that.
Okay. Kevin?
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Councillor Cooper. You know, your point's well made. You know, we're happy to share that type of information. It's not something that we hide. But I'm more than happy to publish the full list of our cemeteries and whether they're open for new burials and interments or not. As you know, it's not to say that cemeteries are closed per se. It's just that for new interments, that we don't have additional capacity in some of them, but there are many local residents who still have layers within the cemetery that will still be in use. And your second point about recovering space and the right of burial, we'll absolutely make sure that local residents are aware of that, because we recognise that it's really important that we have, if we have layers now available, that they're aware of that rather than taking up layers in a neighbouring cemetery.
Margaret?
Yeah, if I could just make one further point. I think that the funeral parlours, as well as our own websites, should be aware of the capacity available within our cemeteries. And certainly in this rural area, over the last few years, I've seen an upturn in the number of farmers choosing to be buried on their own land. There was relatively few in the past, but in the last 2 or 3 years, there's been a bit of an upturn in that. I don't know whether it's noticeable in other rural areas, but we're talking about farm communities that go back 400 and 500 years, and people are reluctant to even go as far as Stonehouse to be buried. So it's just to ensure that the public are aware of, you know, what's available and what capacity we've got. Thanks, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much. And I think there are some suggestions there to take on board. I'm going to come to Eileen Logan, and then I would like to make a suggestion myself. Eileen.
Thanks, Chair. This is obviously a very emotive subject, and people get quite upset, and if they think, oh, there's no space, and where am I going to go, and what's to happen? And I know, unless I'm sadly mistaken, which I don't think I am, that for an absolute fact, people is not getting directed to Lanark from Carluke. I actually was in the cemetery last week, and I know there's spaces because I could see the spaces. And I also think that in my own town, Carluke, in the Clydesdale days, the Council of Clydesdale, as it was, bought two fields, adjoining fields. So the first one is the one that we're still working away on, and if I'm still right of what used to happen, it gets portioned, a bit comes out with X amount, and then another bit and another bit. So there is another field that's got horses, and to my knowledge that was still within council ownership to be apportioned as and when, you know, it was required. And just to back up what was said there, we have an old, what they call the old cemetery, which goes back hundreds and hundreds of years. But even in my own family, I know that there's two plots where there's two spaces if somebody chose to go to there. So I think we have to be careful what we're saying and what we're doing and how we're putting it out. I agree with the Provost suggestion that it might be a good idea to put into websites or wherever we want to put it, to say this one is full, except if you've got a back plot. And I think we should be highlighting that so it's no shock to people if they come. And I think as well that nowadays, from the people that I know, it's a kind of 50-50. A lot of people are choosing cremation, but just putting the ashes in the plot as it is. So, but I don't want this meeting then to start a huge furore in the internet. You know, there's nothing, and where are we going to go? And then, because you can't bring it back. And I don't know about anybody else's place, but maybe Kevin can tell me if I'm right or wrong. But I know that I have never heard anybody getting sent anywhere else from Carluke. To me, they looked as if the back portion of your cemetery was still available. And from my Clydesdale days, I am near enough sure that and no unless we've sold it on again. There was another field actually bought to be portioned up, at the time. I think it's very emotive, and we have to watch what we're saying so that people don't get unnecessarily upset.
Okay, thank you. I think there are sort of points there to reflect on about the wider issues we have with capacity and communication, the benefits of communication. I think Kevin and the rest of the CMT here have heard those and will reflect on them in their own services and resources. Can I come back to the issue of the waste permits? And I would like to suggest not an amendment to the paper, but an addition to the paper, which I've drafted and I'm happy to have circulated, but I will just, if that's beneficial, but really just to say in relation to these sections 2A, B and C, I would like to suggest that we insert an additional point there, which would be a recommendation 2D, and we ask our officials to explore incentives that could assist with home composting. And that would help with places that maybe have particular issues around the waste collection currently. It would also help with give an alternative to people who may choose not to pay the permit charge, because of course the permit scheme becomes an optional scheme until such a time as the government choose to make this mandatory and properly fund councils for delivering it. I also think as part of this paper and the paper that went to community enterprise, it was made clear that we would be providing as a council advice to people around home composting, and not just composting but other alternatives around how you would dispose or use garden waste in a way that's going to be eco-friendly, that might contribute to biodiversity. We can pick that up as part of our waste education work. If I could come to the substantive point, I think we've dealt with the point that this does not appear to be an imminent change, and a number of other local authorities have made clear that they obviously don't think that there's going to be any imminent change in the part of government that would see councils properly funded. And indeed, we could talk about the wider context of government policy in relation to council funding. And the position that they have placed us in. I would also just say in relation to this point, I'm very mindful of the cost of living issues that we're dealing with at the moment, but if I could just say, there is a comparison provided in that paper. I think South Lanarkshire is one of only 5 local authorities that currently provide that service in Scotland, that currently provide that service for free. The majority of local authorities, around 2/3 of them, have some kind of charge. Can I say, as I look at a comparison, Angus Council, Clackmannanshire Council, East Dunbartonshire Council, Glasgow City Council, all SNP councils, all have a garden waste charge, all higher than what is being proposed in the paper today. And I think what we are proposing today is a reasonable charge. We do it with a level of reluctance because we would much rather have certainty this week around government funding. We clearly do not have that certainty, and I think that the proposals that we are setting out to introduce the waste scheme, however reluctantly we might be bringing them forward, are necessary in order to contribute to the financial viability and sustainability of the council. And also necessary to ensure that we can sustain that service. And you can see the projections that are in there around the income that would be generated. And you will know from last year's budget and from the earlier report the nature of the budget challenges ahead. And I have to say, community and enterprise is a resource within the council that has had to absorb a significant level of savings, and we want to do as much as we can to protect the frontline services that we provide. So for all those reasons, I think that the recommendation with the additional suggestion that I've put forward would represent the best way forward. The incentives that we could create for home composting, I'm suggesting that we could look at a number of sources, up to officers to go away and come back with some proposals, but that could include external funding. Options there may be limited, but let's explore it. And it could also simply involve taking a very modest amount of the income that would be generated and reinvesting that in some kind of financial incentive. So I would ask that the committee consider that. I think Councillor Convery would be willing to second that suggestion, and I will come back to Councillor McCallan just to confirm that he has a seconder as well, and to identify who that is. But in the meantime, I'll take the additional questions and points that have been put to me here. So could I come to Robert Brown in the first instance?
Yes, thank you very much, Chair. Let me say I'm very happy to support the amendment that or the addendum that you've put forward there. It may be worthwhile saying that when it came to the Communities and Enterprise Committee, there was obviously an element of exploration of some of the issues at that time. I took the view that it was right to send it, if you like, to the Executive Committee for final decision on this without endorsement at that particular time, in order to enable people to acquaint themselves with some of the issues arising out of it. The strongest argument probably was this issue of the government movements on the matter. For what it's worth, betting on election things seems to be kind of in the vogue at the moment, but for what it's worth, it does seem to me that it's fairly unlikely that the Scottish Government in anything like the near future are going to take on board something which is going to give them additional financial obligations because of the need to recompense the councils. The other point I'd make, though, is really quite an important one, that this is a pros and cons report in some regards. One of the pros is that there will be the opportunity to extend the system of garden waste collection to the 5,000 properties in the rural part of Clydesdale in particular. Now, not to beat about the bush, if the SNP amendment is passed today, then that really means that these 5,000 houses in Clydesdale would not, in fact, get the additional service for quite a long time to come, probably because of that. So I think we're going to take some account of that as we go forward as well. The funding thing is also very important. I mean, many of us perhaps would not have gone down this particular line had it not been for the huge financial pressures that the council faces. But this proposal will, in fact, according to the predictions, produce something of the order of 1.375 million as an annual input, if you like, to the council's funding. We've got to pay off, obviously, some of the charges for extending the system to Clydesdale. And that's not an unimportant issue. And in fact, it's a very important issue against the background that we actually face in this particular situation. So I think these particular points, I think, are really quite important ones. It's not without significance, and you've made the point, I think, yourself, Convener, that most of the other councils in Scotland have gone down that particular direction. And I think that's the parallel we've got to actually look at here. Final point I'd like to make, if I may, is that just the importance that there is on waste education here. This is part of the broader recycling proposals, if you like, that we're having to deal with at the moment, the pressures on that particular matter. We want to have more people home compost. That's the direction of travel we want to go down very strongly if we can. We want to have more people actually recycling their garden waste in the first place. And one of the issues that came out of some of the discussions about this was that 65% of the content of the black bin is in fact recyclable content. And I think there's this broader picture that comes into the matter, as well as the issues we face today. It's extremely important that this report passes, and I'm very keen to give my support to it and to support the amendment as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Could I come to Andrea Cowan?
Thanks. Thank you, Chair. I've actually just received your amendment regarding the composting, and I haven't read it yet, but I will do in a second. I just wondered, though, if I could ask the officers what happened to the previous hot composting scheme that the council were involved with. I managed to secure one for a local community group, but my understanding is that I think 50 were purchased by the council, and I just wondered if the take-up, how the take-up was, and what happened to the other 49. Thanks.
I believe this was a scheme that we stopped funding in order to shift money into the Warm Welcome initiative, but I'm happy to be corrected on that, and I'll maybe come to David Booth to deal with that point. David.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you very much, Councillor Cowan. Yes, as the Chair describes there, this money was redirected towards the Warm Welcome scheme at the time. We thought that was more of a priority. In terms of the number that had been purchased at that point, I would need to go back and check unless, I think Kevin's nodding that he might have more information on that, but the funding overall was redirected to that other scheme at that time. Thank you. Maybe, with your permission, Chair, I'll pass to Kevin.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Councillor Cowans. So your numbers are right. So we were able to order the first 50 before the funding was redirected. We gave some of them out, the first people that requested it. We made it public that we had it as well at the time. Not many came forward, and what we've been doing now is distributing it to community groups wherever there's been situations where they've requested a hot composter or additional recycling facilities and allotments and things like that. So we've been using them for that.
Could I just ask? Could I just ask Kevin if a member of the public were to come forward and ask for one, would that still be an avenue that's open to them?
I'll just need to confirm how many are left. But yeah, if we still have some available, absolutely, we'll be happy to give them out. Yep.
That's great. Yeah, thank you.
That's good. Okay. Can I come back to Ian McCallan just to confirm who will second his amendment? Ian?
Oh, Chair, it's Andrea Cowan, Councillor Andrea Cowan.
Andrea Cowan, right. Thank you very much. Thank you for your patience while we debated the other issues today. Okay, well, you have, I will maybe pass over to Tracy just to talk through the vote, but you have the amended recommendation. Recommendations from myself will be the motion, and we have an amendment from Ian McCallan. I'll just pass on for some clarity on that before you take the opportunity to vote.
Councillor McCallan, can I ask you just to clarify what your amendment is?
Of course. Our amendment is reject the recommendation for a charge and wait until the legislation is introduced before tailoring a council approach. And the legislation probably likely sooner than later, as far as I'm concerned.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for that.
Okay, I'll just start the vote. Just to clarify, proposal by Councillor Fagan, seconded by Councillor Convery, is the recommendations in the report with the additional recommendation that has been circulated. And we have an amendment by Councillor McCallan, seconded by Councillor Cowan, that we reject the charge and wait for clarification from the Scottish Government and how they're going to continue. So I'll just start the vote now. Okay, that's all votes in. I'll just close the vote. And we have 15 votes for the motion, 10 for the amendment and 3 abstentions. So I declare the motion to be carried.
Okay, thank you very much, folks. Can we now move on to the next item, which is the South Lanarkshire Local and Energy Efficiency Strategy, and Stephen Gibson will speak to the report. Stephen. Okay. Here we go.
Thanks, Chair. Good morning, everyone, or maybe good afternoon, everyone. The purpose of this report is to update the Executive Committee on the findings from the consultation on the draft Local Heat and Energy Efficiency Strategy, which I'll call the LHES from here on in, to seek approval for the finalised LHES and to outline the proposed monitoring, reporting and governance arrangements moving forward. The background to the reports in section 2, and it confirms that the concept of an LHES was introduced following Scottish Government consultation in 2017. This was followed by the Government's Heat and Building Strategy published in October 2021, and this strategy confirmed that the introduction of an area-based... Sorry, I'm usually too loud as well. This confirmed, if I can get back, that the introduction of an area-based LHES would be a key element in the Scottish Government's approach to heat decarbonisation moving forward. The creation of an LHES brings together 3 key principles or priorities. The first is the reduction in carbon emissions. The second is the need for improvements in the performance of domestic and non-domestic building stock. And finally, the need for a reduction in fuel poverty. When considering these priorities, it's really important to stress that consideration needs to be given to addressing inequalities to support just transition to net zero by 2045, and I'll come back on to that later. In May 2022, the Scottish Parliament placed a duty on all local authorities in Scotland to prepare, publish and update an LHE's an energy efficiency strategy and a delivery plan. And Section 3.5 confirms that the deadline for doing so was on or before the 31st of December 2023. In developing the LHEs, the teams put a lot of effort, I should say, into making sure that we analysed the necessary data sets and developed, reviewed and analysed everything to make sure we got things right. And we also wanted to make sure we provided enough time to undertake meaningful public consultation and stakeholder consultation. So although the December 23 timescale wasn't reached, we kept the Scottish Government up to date on progress on the anticipated timescales for the publication. Work on the draft was completed in January this year, and the draft strategy and delivery plan were issued for consultation on the 14th of February. Section 4 of the report sets out the consultation and engagement arrangements and the feedback we've received so far. The public and stakeholder consultation for the draft LHEs and the delivery plan covered an 8-week period, and that closed on the 12th of April 2024. As part of the process, the Council engaged widely with a wide range of partners and stakeholders who provided constructive and positive feedback on the strategy. And this is set out in Section 4. We've listed a number of groups who we spoke to, including tenants representatives, housing associations and the business community. You might recall that a special elected members awareness session was also convened on the 10th of May this year, which provided elected members with an opportunity to ask questions about the draft strategy before submission. The external feedback on the draft LHEs was positive, with over 80% of respondents agreeing that the 3 key priorities outlined in the LHEs it confirmed we're on the right track, and these are set out in Section 5.3 of the report. A copy of the draft LHEs was also submitted to the Scottish Government for review, and again the feedback from the Government was positive. They noted that we'd undertake a comprehensive approach to developing the LHEs, and the feedback also highlighted a commitment to decarbonisation, energy efficiency, which aligns with the Scottish Government's statutory targets. The review also noted that the delivery plan's at an early stage, which reflects the development to date, and they expect that this will be developed as the plan evolves in future years. Section 5 covers the proposed LHE's priorities and structure. If today's report is approved, it's proposed that LHE's strategy and delivery plan are published as separate documents on the Council's website. The strategy, as you'd expect, would consider national and local priorities, policies and would provide information and funding, so at a higher level. Whereas the LHE's delivery plan is an action plan, it will identify stakeholder roles and responsibilities, and it will coordinate the actions of the various partners who will be involved in developing the LHEs over the first 5 years. The monitoring and governance arrangements are set out in Section 6. As required in the Scottish Government guidance, LHEs should be reviewed on an annual basis. And what we're proposing is that an annual report is presented to the Climate Change and Sustainability Committee, and that will outline progress achieved and key changes required as we move forward through that first 5-year period. The employee implications are set out in Section 7. As outlined in Section 8.2, the Scottish Government have allocated each local authority a budget of £75,000. That's annual until 2027-28 to support the development and delivery of the first iteration of the LHEs. Section 8 covers the financial implications, and although the LHEs itself does not commit the Council to any expenditure, there will be costs associated with that, and that's something that was discussed at detail at Climate Change Committee and at the Members' Awareness Session. Section 9 draws your attention to our equalities responsibilities. It reaffirms that a key consideration is to ensure just transition in relation to tackling climate change and to make sure that the costs of the LHEs are not loaded onto people who can afford it least. Finally, the recommendations are in Section 2, and the Executive Committee is asked to note the findings of the consultation and engagement with stakeholders regarding the LHEs, to approve the LHE strategy and delivery plan, and to approve the proposed governance, monitoring and reporting arrangements which are set out in the report. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Stephen. That is a very comprehensive document appended to your to the paper. Can I ask if there are any questions? I don't see any questions, so can we agree the report? Agreed. We're agreed. Can I come now to item 13, which is South Lanarkshire State of the Environment Report, and Fraser Carlin is going to speak to this item. Fraser.
Thanks, Chair. The Environmental Assessment Scotland Act requires all public bodies to assess their plans, policies, strategies and programmes. And up to this end, the State of the Environment Report that is presented every year to the Executive Committee. It provides a compendium of information that allows the Council and all of our services and partner agencies to monitor progress against a range of environmental factors. The report assesses activity against 47 activities, and these are summarised in Appendix 1 of the papers provided to members, and as noted in Section 5.2, South Lanarkshire is improving or unchanged on 44 indicators. The real benefit of the State of the Environment Report will be to highlight and guide the work of all Council services and our partners to ensure that we are addressing positively the wide range of environmental factors that are affecting our communities and our natural assets, and to ensure that our new and emerging policies and strategies and decision-making processes recognise this. As such, it is hoped that this paper provides a helpful update of the progress that we are making in South Lanarkshire, and that members agree that this information is distributed to our wider partners and that future reports are brought back to this committee. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Fraser. Can I ask if there are any questions in this report? I don't see any questions, so can we agree the report? Agreed. We are agreed. Can I come now to item 14, which is a Strategic Environmental Assessment Progress Report for 23-24. It's back to you, Fraser.
Thanks, Chair. This paper is for noting, and it seeks to inform the committee of the strategic environmental assessments that have been undertaken or are underway by the Resources in South Lanarkshire Council in the last year. Table 1 on page 268 sets out the strategies that are in progress, while Table 2 indicates the assessments that are complete, and beyond this, paragraphs 4.5 to 4.8 summarise those that will be coming forward. The SEA process as a function is delegated to the Director of Community and Enterprise Resources, and it progresses the work that is overseen by a corporate working group, but it's hoped that this summary allows members to see the range of work involved and the work that the Council is being assessed against within the context of the Environmental Assessment Scotland Act.
Okay, thank you very much. Are there any questions on that report? No, so we will note it and move to item 15, which is the South Lanarkshire Local Housing Strategy Annual Review, and it's Stephen Gibson. You're going to speak to this report. Stephen.
Thanks, Chair. The purpose of this report is to provide an update on progress made during 2023-24 against the delivery of the agreed outcomes set out in the local housing strategy for the period 2022 to 27. The legal position set out in section 3.1, the Housing Scotland Act 2001 requires local authorities to carry out an assessment of need and demand for housing and related services and to prepare and submit a 5-year local housing strategy to Scottish ministers. The most recent or the existing local housing strategy was approved by the Executive Committee in November 2022, and in doing so you agreed that it would be subject to an annual review. So this is the first annual review of the existing local housing strategy for 2022 to 27. Section 4 sets out a bit of the context and the policy changes, and since approving the strategy a number of significant changes have taken place both locally and nationally, and these are set out in section 4. In particular, the housing sector has faced significant challenges with the Scottish Government, the Chartered Institute of Housing and a number of local authorities declaring a housing crisis based on the very sharp increase in housing in demand for homelessness services. and a severe pressure being placed on housing services and wider resources as a consequence. Since November 22, we've seen the implementation of a range of legislative and budgetary changes. These have increased levels of uncertainty around the new affordable housing supply programme and the standards of affordable housing moving forward. A summary of these are set out in section 4.2, and they include reference to the 26% reduction in the National Affordable Housing Supply Programme budget, which of course will impact new supply moving forward. It includes the publication of the Housing Scotland Bill 2024, which sets out proposals for the New Deal for tenants. And finally, linked to climate change, there are various proposals and consultations in relation to the Scottish Housing Net Zero Standard, the Heat and Buildings Bill, and a reform to energy performance certificates. Moving on to section 5, this provides the update on performance in the first year of the plan for 23-24. Section 5.1 confirms there are 107 indicators, and as usual, we compare these in the usual way. They're categorised green, amber or red. As seen in section 5.2, 60% of indicators are on track, and which is really good news. Section 5.3 of the report confirms that the review demonstrated very good progress has been made for 62 of the indicators, with 3 of them already complete. The 29 to be reported later just reflects the fact that this is year 1 of a 5-year plan, and we'll come back over the next 4 years to give update on those. And again, they're not categorised as amber. We've got no concerns about them so far. There are 10 indicators which are categorised as amber, and what's continuing on these. And again, we'll report back next year, but the feeling just now is that we're on track for these. In line with trends across Scotland, South Lanarkshire Council continues to experience unprecedented demand for statutory homeless services, and this is reflected in 3 measures directly linked to homelessness, which we've not met. A series of actions to mitigate the impact and the demand for statutory homeless services has continued to be reported to the Housing and Technical Resource Committee and Executive Committee, and these are set out in section 5.7. I think you've seen these before, you'll be well versed with them, and these relate to prevention, sufficient supply of temporary accommodation, and a drive towards creating more permanent accommodation where we can. Section 6 of the report proposes revisions to the local housing strategy framework, and during this review we've identified 7 proposed amendments, and these are set out in a table from section which is set out in section 6.2. And this proposes a number of amendments and changes. Some actions are complete, some are already launched, and for example, we've just approved the LHE strategy, and what we're proposing to do with the LHE strategy is just to amend the target based on the approval we've got today. Looking further ahead in section 7, the delivery of a second year of the local housing strategy will continue against a very challenging backdrop for housing and homelessness. And especially with that lack of clarity about funding and the funding for new affordable housing moving forward. However, in addition to the indicators being progressed within the strategy, the Council and its partners will continue to take forward a wide range of work. That includes monitoring progress through the Scottish Parliament of the Scottish Housing Bill 2024, contributing to the revised strategic commissioning plan and working in collaboration with the local partners, contributing to the development of a local development plan, and monitoring the outcome of the ongoing Scottish consultations linked to housing, and these are, as I've said, linked to the Scottish Housing Net Zero Standards, which replaces EASH 2 and the Heat and Buildings Bill. In terms of next steps, the Council and its housing, health and homelessness partners have identified, we've agreed that we're making very, very good progress, and we'll continue to monitoring the local housing strategy in future years. The recommendations, of course, are in section 2, and the recommendation is, if I can get back to the page with the recommendations, is that the progress of actions for delivering the local housing strategy priority outcomes for the 5 years, or over the 5 years, be noted, and especially the progress in year 1. Thanks very much.
Okay, thank you very much. We will note the report, and can we come now to item 16, which is on the resource plans and the Connect report, and Neil Reid is going to speak to this item. Neil.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, so this report provides committee with the resource plans for 24-25, which have been making their way through respective committees, and also gives an indication of how that connects to our council plan reporting. So in paragraph 3.1, there's a link to the resource plans which can be found on the Council's website. They should all be uploaded there by now. Section 4 covers the annual resource planning process, which includes an exercise, a horizon scanning exercise whereby resources discover areas for focus in the year ahead, and those are summarised at table 1 in the report, just to give an overview across the council of what the different resources see as being their key areas of focus. And you'll see that the cost of living crisis features quite prominently across the council, as well as sustainability and climate change actions, and also financial pressures. But you can see also that each resource has topics which are specific to them. Section 5 discusses the way in which resource plans provide measures which go towards our council plan reporting, and there's a table there which shows how many measures are being proposed by each resource towards the Connect monitoring, and we will be reporting around about 61 measures in the coming financial year. So to take you back to the recommendations, it's to note the resource plans and also the reporting intention in relation to Connect. Thanks, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much. Are there any questions on that report? I don't see any questions. Can I therefore will note the report and move to the final item? Ian, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, just this is asking committee to note action taken under Standing Order 37 to replace Councillor Handabode with Councillor Williams as a member of the Education Appeals Committee, and that was so we could deal with placing appeals during this time of year. Happy to take any questions.
Okay. Are there any questions? I don't see any, so we can agree the report. There are no items of urgent business, and so I'll bring the meeting to a close. Thank you, everybody. Thank you.